Officer Reed Shelton and his wife Beck are finally taking that rugged camping vacation in the Idaho mountains that Reed had been talking about for years. However, their first night on the trail turns into a living hell as unworldly screams tear through the night. The camping couple has to run for their lives as a pack of hidden monsters chase them down, eventually separating them and capturing Beck. Beck struggles to stay alive in the monster's clutches, while Reed desperately tries to find out where she is and what took her. Monster is a 2005 thriller written by Frank Peretti, known for other books like This Present Darkness and The Oath. And while it's not advertised anywhere on the book, this is actually Christian fiction. I'll touch on that later. Now, I love a good thriller, and the book started out pretty well. The relevant characters were detailed very well in the opening chapters, the setting was basic but served the story and crafted an eerie environment, and the initial attack scene was a lot of fun. Peretti grabbed my attention and pulled me right into the scene as Reed and Beck get chased down by these lumbering monsters on a dark mountain trail. But my interest quickly wavered as a myriad of problems came barreling down at me one right after the other. And those problems start with the monsters themselves. The monsters are Bigfoot and his family. Beck was abducted by Bigfoot. And no, that's not a spoiler, you learn it very early. There is another monster, but it's shoved in at the last minute for some poorly thought out theme, and could very easily have been written out entirely. First off, the best character in the book was Beck herself, if only because she really had to use her head to adapt to being adopted by a grieving Sasquatch mother. She had a stutter and broke an ankle running away during the first night, so she was reasonably stuck with a giant ape woman who could bench press a truck. However, a lot of her scenes started to repeat themselves. She would wonder if she was going to die, make an observation about the Sasquatches, wonder what Reed was doing, rinse and repeat. But she was a lot better to read about than Reed or their friend Capella and his wife Sing. Reed jumped right into action the day after Beck's abduction and got some hunting parties together, raving about these large monsters roaming the mountains. But while Beck's scenes repeated themselves, showing her doing various things to survive, Reed spent most of his time preparing to do something. What I thought was going to be a desperate search for his wife, tearing through the woods on the trail of some ravenous beast, turned into a guy pattering around a cabin and sometimes traipsing through the woods. While he was in some good scenes and was the driving force for the only other two scenes that I liked, he didn't take action very much or stand out all that well from the rest of the characters. The best description I can give him is, he's the protagonist. There are also several side characters, but none of them have any presence about them. I can count the number of distinguishable characters in this book on one hand, and even those characters are lightly defined. The numerous other hunters and cops assisting Reed in his search through the woods could have served just fine as nameless extras, but the book treats them with distinction, like I'm supposed to remember a dozen different people with no memorable characteristics among them. The biggest difference between the lot of them were their names, and I can only remember maybe 2 of those. Now, one thing that I did like was the detailed maps. Longtime viewers will know that I love me some maps in books, and Monster delivers spectacularly in a way I've never seen before. Chapter 1 opens with a basic map showing more than 100 square miles around where the story takes place, and every single chapter afterwards shows the same map, with an update. Whenever a significant event happens, a little icon pops up to show where it happened. It was a very small touch, but it did get me excited to finish each new chapter. But one tremendous misstep was revealing what the monsters were very early. If they had been kept in the shadows, or if Reed wanted to return to the mountains and avenge his wife, that could work. It was the mystery of what those monsters were that really made the opening chase scene work. You had no idea what creatures were behind our main couple, and that made them terrifying. However, that veil is lifted within a few chapters, and not only do we get a full description of what the monsters look like, a common mistake in horror movies, but Beck gives them all names and studies their personalities. The Sasquatches all get humanized, and that takes away from the horror and thrills that I felt while initially reading about them. One of them even dotes on Beck, acting like a loving mother, to the point where there's very little danger for her. The monsters in this monster story are just boring. I'd be more scared of Chucky. At least he's trying to kill people. The writing style is also a mess. While mundane events litter the bulk of the story, outside of Beck's sections, the overall pacing is atrocious. After the initial attack, I was pumped and ready to keep reading, but was bogged down with almost 200 pages of basically filler. I don't need an action scene every other chapter to keep my brain engaged, but after the third uneventful trek through the woods looking for clues, I was ready to call it quits. The climax did get my attention a little bit, and there was one other scene that finally captured the same style as the first chase scene where a hunter got mauled to death, but everything else was just a dull chore to get through. And part of that was the really dumb message that the book was trying to push. Now, like I said before, this is Christian fiction, and that in and of itself is not a bad thing. I've praised the work of Stephen James before with his books The Rook and the Knight, and those were both classified as Christian fiction. However, James wisely stuck to writing characters who were religious, rather than jamming it in your face. It doesn't start out as such, but the religion gets very heavy-handed later in the book. After a while, multiple characters became so dependent on calling out to God or wondering how this is all part of his grand design that I thought God was actually going to make an appearance. While I'm sure a Christian audience wouldn't mind it so much, I found it a little grating after reading about it for the 20th time. But the real problem is that late in the story, the book pushes a strong creationist message. Apparently, the author thinks that evolution isn't real and beneficial mutations don't exist. And while he's absolutely allowed to believe that, I'm also allowed to mock him for it. I imagine that in the sequel, the characters will all discover that the Earth is flat, and vaccines cause autism, and the moon is made of cheese! While I don't need pinpoint scientific accuracy in my thriller novels, at least a passing understanding is nice. This is elementary level stuff, and it just really bothered me. It did this by revealing some mad science plot about trying to combine human and chimpanzee DNA. It created this other tacked-on monster that went around killing people, but otherwise came out of nowhere and felt completely unnecessary. Overall, Monster is really just a sleep aid. Boring, trite, and a chore to get through. The characters are very flat, the plot is nothing special, the pacing is torture, and the message is an embarrassment. Just skip this one. The only monster books I need are the ones written by Naoki Urasawa. So, have you read the book? What did you think? If not, do you want to read it now? Whatever your thoughts, comment below and stay tuned for more.